Howdy guys, and welcome to Cliff Notes. This is the episode recap for Amazing Race episode 6. Hope y'all are all doing fantastic. We got another episode tonight watching our racers going across Europe, hitting a brand new country. So first of all, what happened last week? Well, in episode 5, unfortunately, we lost the team of Michelle and Victoria after they got lost driving in the streets of Paris. So now we're down to 7 teams. And now we learn that they're through with France. The teams are all leaving Paris. They're leaving in the middle of the night. And they're heading by train to Berlin, Germany. Now, the first team to depart, and they left just a little bit, like around 12:30 or so, were Riley and Madison, the pro volleyball players. And the last team to depart for this leg of the race were Haley and Kaylin, who left 5:30 or so. So there's about a 5-hour gap between the first team and the last team to leave. But because no trains go at night, apparently, leaving France, we end up with all 7 teams on the same train heading to Berlin. It leaves the next morning. It's about a 10-hour train trip to get to Berlin, so a little bit further than I expected until I looked it up. Now, it is interesting. Little point I noticed here. It's interesting to hear the first 6 teams while they're at the Paris train station discussing who they think the last team might be that survived the last leg of the race. Apparently, the teams did not hang out with each other or interact with each other as soon as they got onto the mat and finished the last leg of the race. Now, we'd seen earlier, like in Colombia, they all spent the night together, sleeping side by side. But that wasn't the case here. We don't know exactly what happened, but they didn't know who was in last place until Haley and Kaylin actually show up at the train station. And then they know who it is. Leo and Alana are excited to see that it's Haley and Kaylin that are still in the race, since these 2 teams have kind of been helping each other in the past legs. But at the same time, those 2 teams are helping each other. We also still have the 5-team alliance that was formed back in Colombia. They're still all in the game. They're still working together. So we kind of have 2 different groups that are working, helping each other out. But, and I get the strategy, but as the teams' numbers continue to drop, are these alliances are they going to stay strong? Or are we going to start seeing some cracks forming with these groups? And that starts tonight, my friends. All right, so upon arrival at the train station in Berlin, we see a long sprint by all the teams as they run out of the airport and they're trying to catch that first taxi. It seems like all the teams get a pretty good start, except for Haley and Kaylin, who are the last ones to get outside. And unfortunately, most of the taxis are gone by that point in time. The taxi driver actually asked him, says, "Oh, why didn't you just run a little bit faster?" And then, well, I wish we had. But they get a taxi before too much longer. And it doesn't really matter because the first stop, once they get to Berlin, they all have to take their taxis to the East Side Gallery, which is an outdoor exhibit. It's it's a World Historical Heritage Site. It features almost a mile-long length of the Berlin Wall that is still standing. Now, just for your information, 31 years ago, in November, 31 years ago this month, that the Berlin Wall actually fell and basically the Cold War was over. As a child of the Cold War, it doesn't seem like it's been that long, but 31 years since we had the wall fall. But they still have this almost mile-long length of the wall, put all kinds of murals and stuff been painted on. It's really kind of cool. But anyway, they have to get to this mural. And once they get there, they're all searching for the next clue, which turns out it's hidden in a suitcase. It's right next to this wall. They're running back and forth. Picture a mile-long worth of wall, and they're having to run back and forth looking for it. But it seems like most of the teams, all the teams, find the clue at just almost the exact same time. So they open up this suitcase. They all grab their clues, and they're ready to head to the next part of the challenge itself, next part of the race. And now the fun begins. This was a fun leg watching some of these competitions. The first thing, each team must hop into their own Trabant car, I think it's Trabant car, and drive to a Teledisco. Now, there's some interesting little words in that little sense, aren't there? Let's talk about the Trabant first. It was a little bitty car, tiny little car. I'd have a hard time fitting in there. It's a tiny little car. It was built in communist East Germany. It was built throughout the Cold War, I think from 1957 till about 1991 or so. It's considered one of the worst cars that has ever been built. A joke, apparently at the time in Germany, was, why does a Trabant have heated back windows? so you can keep your hands warm when you're pushing it down the street. So yeah, not the best reputation. It had a steel frame, but all the exterior was made out of a hard plastic. It ran on a 2-stroke engine, which is basically what you find in today's lawnmower. The top speed was only 62 miles per hour, and it took 20 or 30 seconds to get up to that top speed. There was no outdoor fuel cap. If you wanted to put gasoline in the car, you had to open the hood and pour it in, mixed in with oil, kind of like we do with oil in a car now. You had to just pour it straight into the engine. It was one of the worst polluting vehicles that we have ever had on the face of the earth. But even with that, the waiting list back in the Cold War for a typical East German citizen, the waiting list to get one of these vehicles was somewhere between 10 and 13 years. Once you got your name on a list, that's how long you had to wait before a vehicle was actually ready for you. So yeah, that's the Trabant vehicle. It's tiny. It's a hard little car. And for our racers, it is hard to drive. It's got a stick shift, but not a stick shift on the floor, which we saw last week how hard some of the teams dealt with that kind of stick shift. This stick shift is actually on the steering wheel, so it's very hard to figure out. It's so hard to drive this vehicle that all our teams were actually given instructions, reading on how to start the car, how to shift the car, how to do the most basic functions with it. So it's pretty funny. Again, and not a good sign for the teams who had problems with a regular stick shift. Now they've got it just a little bit tougher even at that. We end up seeing Chi and Hung, the married parents, they're driving, and Chi actually keeps the car in first gear the entire time he's driving it because he either doesn't know how or he's scared to try to shift it out of any other gear. So he keeps it in first place. The blonde sisters, Haley and Kaylin, they can't even get the car started. They're behind everyone else because they can't even figure out how to get this thing started. And Will and James, eventually a little bit later in the race, their transmission goes out on them. I have a feeling they burned out the clutch trying to make this thing work. And it craters on them. They end up having to abandon the vehicle. So lots of fun watching these racers deal with, and Gary and D'Angelo, big old NFL football players, try to squeeze into this little tiny vehicle. It's like when in the old days of the circus, the clown cars, and people just kept piling out of that little car. That's what we saw with the NFL players trying to fit into that Trabant car. So that was pretty funny. But eventually they do all get in their vehicles. They head off to the next location, which is a Teledisco. Have you ever heard of a Teledisco? Tele as in telephone, disco as in, Saturday Night Fever and all of that. Well, sure enough, it's a combination of the two. What it basically is, it's a converted phone booth. Berlin is all cell phones, just like everywhere else. So instead of just destroying the old phone booths, they've converted some of them into discos. Tiny little discos. This thing only is big enough to hold maybe 2 or 3 people, but it plays disco music. It has fog, strobe lights, a disco ball, obviously. And you put in a couple of euros, you can play a song, the door locks, so you can play a song, you can dance to your heart's content for that song, and just have fun in your little converted telephone booth. And so every team has to go to the Teledisco and have a picture made of them. It takes pictures as well, have a picture made of them to move on to the next leg of the race. Now, the task itself seems pretty easy. Just go in and dance for 3 minutes or so. But it seems like finding this little converted telephone booth was a tough part. Leo and Alana and Aparna and Eswar, they had hard times finding it. They kind of went back and forth, and as a result, they end up towards the back of the pack once they get to this part of the race. Haley and Kaylin had a little bit of difficulty finding as well, but they were already behind the curve just because they had problems starting the car up. So those are the 3 teams that are at the back of the pack as we get to this Teledisco, and we watch all of them dancing to German techno music and taking their pictures. Pretty funny watching. But every team has to dance through the whole thing. From there, once you complete that, each team then has to head to a hotel. It's like an 18-story high hotel where one member of each team has to walk down the side of the building with the help of ropes. Remember the old Batman TV show where they were walking up the side of the building, basically vertical or horizontal, walking up? Well, it's the same way, except now you're facing straight down. It doesn't look like a lot of fun at all. They're held up with ropes, obviously, but they have to walk down. But even worse, while they're walking down, there are lit letters on a roof right in front of them, a lower roof, a bunch of letters that are lighting on and off, and they have to remember these letters and unscramble them to get the answer to this word, which they have to figure out. And if they can't solve this word scramble, they have to repeat the trip. They have to go back up another flight of 15 stairs to get to the roof again, go back down, and keep repeating the process until they solve it. So it's a tough challenge. Yeah, I mentioned that Will and James burned out their clutch. That actually happened between the Teledisco and this hotel. Fortunately for the two of them, they're only a couple of blocks away from the hotel, so they just leave the car on the side of the road and they just take off running. And the rules, apparently you didn't have to actually drive it up to the hotel, you just had to get there. So they make it to the hotel. They abandon that car at that point in time. Now, one thing at the hotel, when the teams get there, we see that the yield box is sitting here. Every episode we've had a yield box. Apparently that's what we're going to have this season, at least for a few more episodes. But once again, not a single team uses their yield hourglass on another team. I get it for the teams that are in the early lead that aren't worried so much about going home. But it surprises me that the teams towards the back of the pack aren't considering this option more than they have. Will and James are the only ones that have used a yield so far, I think. I'm pretty sure. No one used it on this episode, and I was kind of surprised. But it was there, and it just wasn't utilized. But even without the yield box being used, we see some conflicts at this particular challenge. This is where things kind of come to a boil, it seems like. D'Angelo and Gary are the first, the NFL players. They're the first to arrive at the hotel. He goes up to the top, D'Angelo does. He comes down. He didn't even notice the letters. He was just so worried about facing forward going down that he didn't notice it. Well, about that time, Chi and Hung show up, and he tells Hung as they're going back up the stairs saying, look, you've got to unscramble these letters, so watch for these letters, and let's help each other. No one leaves till we figure it out and we tell the other one. And Hung says, yeah, I promise you, I will not, if I figure it out, I will not leave until I tell you. So she goes first. As she goes down, sure enough, she's terrified. She's screaming at the top of her lungs. She does not look like she's having fun, but she does look at the letters. She does figure out that the secret word, once it's unscrambled, is sauerkraut. And so when she gets to the bottom, instead of leaving, she gets her clue telling her where to go next. But instead of leaving, she and Hung wait until Gary and D'Angelo gets back down, and she tells D'Angelo what the secret word is. Again, it's sauerkraut. And so she tells him, and then D'Angelo and Gary wait just a little bit to also tell Riley and Madison. Remember, we got this team of 5, or this alliance of 5 teams that are still working together, and they're still working together at this point in time. So you've got Chi and Hung, who have waited to tell Gary and D'Angelo. Gary and D'Angelo then tell Riley and Madison. So all 3 teams pretty much leave that challenge at the same time. Unfortunately, there's only one taxi waiting at this particular location. And Gary and D'Angelo run for it and grab it before Chi and Hung. They get in the taxi and they take off. Now, Chi and Hung are not happy about this. They feel like since they solved the word scramble, they should have been allowed to have that taxi first, since they gave D'Angelo the answer. And I get it. I absolutely do. But on the other hand, D'Angelo also had told Chi that that you had to unscramble the letter. So they were helping each other. And, you do what you have to do. But they're not happy. They feel like Gary and D'Angelo are very happy to take help, but they aren't really giving it out. So they say they're going to change the way they act going forward. We'll see if it happens. Again, we're starting to see little cracks in some of these alliances at this point in time. We also see more conflict at this location also when Leo and Alana are in 5th place, so they're towards the back of the pack, and he basically refuses to give the word scramble answer to Haley, who is in last place. She says, how hard is it? And he said, kind of hard. It took most people a few tries and everything. But she never asked him directly, but he also never volunteers the answer. And she knows that he could have given her the answer. So at one point she has a little confessional where she says, well, he's not helping us, so we're not going to help him anymore. I get it from Leo and Alana. They're at the back. They're worried they may get eliminated, so they don't want to help the team that's behind them, and I would not help them either. But I'm curious to see if it's going to come back and bite them, because it's, you help each other, it works, but sometimes you have to play your own game. You have to make sure you survive, but there may be a price to pay somewhere down the road. As a result, because of this, it does take Haley forever. She probably had to go up and down those stairs 3 or 4 times. They didn't show just how many times it took, but 3 or 4 times before finally she just memorized all the letters and found a guest in the hotel lobby who helped her unscramble it and figure it out. So it took her a long time. As a result, Haley and Kaylin are definitely in last place at this point in time. So All the guests have now moved on to the final detour of this leg. Detour means you do one of two separate challenges. And they have to decide whether they're going to teach a beer yoga class to a bunch of other people or sing a song, I Wish I Was a Chicken, sung all in German, with a German harmony group behind you. Now, I'm not the most flexible guy. I'm probably not a yoga master necessarily, but I'm also horrible at the German language. So I think if it was me and I was having to choose, I would probably go with the task that involves the beer, even if it also involves a little bit of yoga. As it turns out, I think we have pretty reasonable mix. 3 people do beer yoga. I think 4 people do singing in German, or 3 and 4 the other direction. It's pretty even split between the 2 tasks. But we watched Gary and D'Angelo start, and they also are the first to finish the beer yoga. It's got 4 different poses you have to teach, and there's a lot of steps involved. It was not an easy task. It was just a lot of memorization of doing all these different poses between each of the 4 groupings or whatever. But they do it, and they finish up. And at the same time, Will and James are the first ones to try the I Wish I Was a Chicken, and they sell it. They're performers, and they're jumping around, dance like chickens, and having a lot of fun with it. So they're the first to complete that challenge. They're both racing to the mat to finish to see who wins first. And as it turns out, Gary and D'Angelo are the first to reach the final checkpoint, which gives them an extra $7,500 each. So winning first, besides being protected and all of that, it also a little cash prize here and there. So they win $15,000 combined, $7,500 each. Hung and Chi, who also did the yoga, they end up finishing in 3rd place, less than 15 minutes behind Gary and D'Angelo. The volleyball players beat them by just a little bit, but they finish less than 15 minutes away from 1st place. It truly looks like, and it's discussed a little bit, their decision to help the NFL players instead of immediately taking off in that taxi, it might have cost them $15,000. It truly could have. So it may make them think more about what they're going to do in the future in terms of helping people, even if they're people within their own alliance. So with that in mind, again, we've got Gary and D'Angelo finishing 1st place. The rest of the results, Gary and D'Angelo in 1st place. Riley and Madison, the pro volleyball players, finishing 2nd. Hung and Chi finish in 3rd place. Will and James, the first ones to complete the chicken challenge, but they still finish in 4th place. Eswar and Aparna finish in 5th. Leo and Alana finish in 6th place, which means finishing in last place, and not the first time that this has happened, unfortunately, but finishing in last place, Haley and Kaylin. So that's, they finish in last place. And it's another non-elimination leg. These people, these 2 racers have been so lucky. Once again, they finished last place, but they finished last place in a leg that's non-elimination leg. So they live to fight another day. So we will see Haley and Kaylin again next week, but they will have an extra little speed bump. And that's it, guys. So yeah, it's exciting race. Just in terms of my thoughts with it, yes, it helps in the early part of the race to help other teams because it's just about not finishing in last place. But now that we're just down to 7 teams or so, you've got to be a lot more careful because the smallest little thing could screw things up. And next thing you know, you're in last place. So you can't help other teams too much. You need to hope that one of them is behind enough that if you screw up, you're still going to be safe. So as a result of it, we are seeing some cracks form in these different alliances. And I think it's only going to get worse as we go forward. It has to. They're running out of other people. So fantastic. I loved watching them compete in Germany, seeing some of the history of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall, and then doing the funny stuff with Teledisco and the cars and all that. Guys, y'all have a fantastic week. I will be back real soon with episode 7 of The Amazing Race. Until then, have a great one, guys. Cheers, my friends. Bye.